stop slipping and stop cutting your socks. We have 15 different color options between 3 grip socks and 2 sleeve types. Something for everybody at a price that just makes sense. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
If we're talking football boots at full retail from the big three, $120 gets you something pretty entry level. Not necessarily bad, but also nothing that you would consider to be overly premium. Enter Charly. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the Charly Stingr PFX, a football boot that falls into the power/control category with what is a textile-based synthetic upper and giant rubber elements for the sake of extra grip on the ball on both the lateral and medial side of the upper, a one-piece construction with some premium knit filling in the central portion of the upper, and a sole plate end stud pattern that looks as expensive as just about anything. However, they're not expensive. This top-end football boot retails for just $120. And you can even get them in laceless form, all the same features as the version with laces, but of course without them for the exact same $120 retail price. Where for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Charly brand entirely, it's a Mexican company that has been around for quite some time, but recently within the last year or so is expanding into other markets around the world. Where unlike a lot of other football boot brands that are inexpensive in their native country and then as they expand globally they up the retail price significantly, Charly is trying to remain affordable across the board, where in theory you are able to get a top-end quality football boot at what is more or less a second-tier takedown model price by 2025 standards. A mission statement that maybe sounds a little bit too good to be true, but that's exactly what I want to clarify in today's video as we go over all the details of the Stingr PFX, talk tech, performance, along with how they fit and feel on feet, and ultimately conclude whether or not this is a good pair of football boots for $120 or a $120 football boot that is as good as some that cost more than double the price. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, and if you are interested in either of these for yourself, laced or laceless, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. And as always, if you enjoy the content, perhaps like seeing things that you don't normally see, don't forget to drop a like on the video, and if you appreciate the unsponsored, unsugar-coated, brutally honest opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. So first things first, and this has nothing to do with performance, but it is very relevant when picking out a brand new pair of football boots, the way that these look. And personally, I would argue that they punch well above their weight in terms of what they cost versus how they present. While the logos and styling might be a little bit unfamiliar compared to the boots that you're used to seeing all the time, there is nothing about the Charly Stingr PFX that I think looks cheap or that would even suggest that they cost anywhere near the $100 mark. Obviously, colorways are a matter of personal preference. I think that this royal blue one looks really good. I can't say I'm quite as in love with this laceless colorway here in this kind of lighter teal with the yellow accents, but regardless of that, again, the styling and general quality from a visual perspective, I definitely think is on point, and again, a lot better than what you're going to get typically from football boots around this price point. When it comes to feel and performance, however, once again, these did not disappoint entirely because there are a few quirks about it and potentially some things that are of concern that we'll get to, but for the most part, this is the design that I think probably most closely mirrors what is currently available from the Adidas Predator 25 series, although if we want to relate this to a pair of Predators, they actually remind me a lot of the Adidas Predator Edge, which I always thought was a fantastic design, but unfortunately a pair of football boots that just fit and felt awful. Way too stiff and generally just unpleasant to play in. Those are boots that retailed for in and around 250 plus. These retail for 120, and I would argue feel 10 times better. The upper is textile based in that the main body is just a padded mesh material with a fused top layer with a little bit of 3D texturing to it and an internal lining material that is super soft. From a touch perspective, it's definitely on the thinner side, but it does have nice pliability to it. It takes a little bit of break-in time out of the box. I would say they are a little bit stiffer than I would say they look. But again, once the upper softens up on you, you're definitely going to find that this feels as premium as any other thin synthetic you're going to find from a top-end pair of football boots. On the surface, all the areas that don't have rubber are relatively smooth and slick to the touch, providing minimal extra grip on the ball. And then of course, you're going to find these waves of rubber in the form of these kind of extended long fins that run along the outside of the foot and then along the inside of the foot, particularly in the area where you're going to be receiving passes, making passes, and of course, striking through the ball. And as you'd expect, these fins are soft rubber, very flexible, and grip the ball very aggressively. In terms of providing as much grip as possible by way of rubber elements, this is pretty much as good as it gets right now. There is more grip to be had here from these than what you would get from the rubber striking elements currently available on the Predator 25. So if anything, again, the Predator Edge or maybe even the Predator LZ series would be the better comparison for this specific design, which is absolutely not a bad thing at all. However, you probably notice that some of the rubber elements have already fallen off. And I will say that out of the two pairs that I tested, I only had these two fall off on the right boot. Nothing fell off of the left boot. And on the laceless pair, everything is still perfectly intact. So I can only assume there was some kind of a manufacturing defect specifically with this right boot, where I don't want to go on the internet and say that there's a gigantic durability issue. Obviously, this is something that you don't want to happen right away with a relatively new pair of football boots. And I'm sure if I contacted Charly's warranty department, they would be happy to replace these for me, or at the very least, refund my money. Nonetheless, it is something to be aware of, and I suppose something to watch out for if you do decide to go for a pair, is just pay attention to how many strips of rubber remain on the upper, because it's clear that they can technically fall off given that they are just glued to the surface. But at the same time, this isn't really a new manufacturing process for a pair of football boots. I really do think these were maybe just misglued or something like that. So as far as durability concerns go, it's something to keep an eye on, but not necessarily reason to avoid these football boots. Where from a touch and feel perspective, I was overall just really impressed with these boots. Again, considering the $120 retail price, these feel like high-end models and offer a really unique sensation on the ball in terms of providing so much extra grip on both the lateral and medial side of the upper, but then seemingly almost no grip at all in the toe box and forefoot area, which admittedly does take a little bit of getting used to. Personally, I would like the grip to be a little bit more consistent across the entire foot, but once you get used to it, the touch on the ball is quite nice. And personally, I'm just a big fan of rubber elements that provide as much grip as these do. And given the amount of surface area that they cover, pretty much every time you make contact with the ball, you're going to get that bite in terms of extra grip, which I think just gives this boot such a nice sensation of control, and it makes it so easy to generate spin on the ball, which in turn doesn't necessarily make your shot more powerful or more accurate, but I've always found that having more grip on the surface of the upper does give you a sensation of accuracy that a more slick finish upper doesn't necessarily have. What's happening across the top of the foot is really going to be your main difference between the laced and laceless variations, where of course with the laced model you have a one-piece upper construction with holes punched along the side, creating this dual lace hole setup where the laces connect to the upper, in turn resulting in a tighter, more secure, more locked in feel when you slide your foot inside the boots and tie the laces tight. For me, it is by far the better fitting and feeling version of this football boot. And that's because in the case of the laceless model, obviously it's a one-piece upper construction as you'd expect, and the central portion of the upper is filled in with an elasticated knit material as you'd find with most laceless models these days. But I just found that because of the shaping of the football boot, and you can even see how the laceless system kind of bumps out a little bit on this particular pair, it's just not as tight as I would like it to be. Not to the point where they feel like they're going to fly off of your feet, but certainly from a lockdown, stability, and general responsiveness perspective, I just found these to be a little bit too loose for my liking, where immediately when I switched to the lace variation, the boots as a whole just felt more secure and generally more like a second skin on my feet rather than something that I want to say was hanging on for dear life, but I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. Nonetheless, these feel like passengers on your feet. These feel like they're a little bit more connected. But then again, considering the $120 retail price, if you've been dying to try a pair of laceless football boots, this is by far the best laceless boot that you can get for the money. If you're comparing these to the $100 laceless league takedown models from Adidas, these are 10 times better. Moving to the rear, the Stingers of course feature a standard low cut design with this kind of mock knit collar that extends from the tongue area across the top of the foot. You have an internal plastic heel counter, which is nice and solid. And again, just the general finishing and build quality is very much like you'd expect to find on a $200+ pair of football boots. Internally, the heel liner is a soft microfiber. It's got a decent amount of padding. You can see that the little graphic that they've printed on the heel isn't exactly lined up in the middle, where if you look at this particular laceless pair, it's a little bit more centralized. Nonetheless, it does nothing in terms of feel. I think the shaping and general amount of padding, as well as the heel liner material itself, just does a good job of feeling comfortable and holding your heel in place really effectively. Then the insole fully removable, I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It features a pretty standard mesh liner on top, comes up a little bit higher along the sides than what we typically see. And in terms of the foam, I would say it's about twice as thick as a lot of football boot insoles that we often see even in top end models. And it's made from this really soft, spongy blue foam material where it's ultimately nothing special, but at the same time, I'd argue that it's nicer in terms of feel and quality than what you're gonna find in some football boots that again, cost more than twice as much. Moving to the base, you're going to find a sole plate and stud pattern that features design elements that might be familiar to you and that we have seen variations of this in other football boots, but I would by no means consider it to be a copy. And again, considering the $120 price point, it very much feels like something you'd expect to find on a top end pair of football boots. From a feel perspective, the sole plate is solid and definitely has some structure to it. I wouldn't say it's the most responsive thing in the world, but it certainly doesn't feel flimsy. And as far as the FG stud pattern is concerned, it's made up predominantly of these chevron shaped blades with some straight blades in the middle of the forefoot. You even have that little toe pick stud, and it's also being branded as FG-AG from Charly, where on firm natural grass, the traction, as you'd expect from something like this, is very aggressive. This style of stud, both in terms of profile and shape, digs into the ground really nicely and gives you plenty of bite when pushing off, accelerating, decelerating, changing direction, whatever it may be. It's top notch on that natural grass type of surface. However, on artificial grass, I would personally argue that this is on the aggressive side to the point where it might be overly clingy and potentially a little bit unsafe. So if you are buying these to use on artificial grass, I would do so using extreme caution. However, if you just need an affordable pair of football boots and you mostly play on natural grass and only occasionally play on artificial grass, there is that peace of mind element where Charly is saying to you, the consumer, you can wear our football boots on artificial grass and we are not going to void your warranty, something that you will not find from most of the football boot options on offer. Again, from the big three. And then there's the weight, where again, when you're talking about a top-end football boot, the expectation, regardless of what category they fall into, is that they're going to be relatively light. Is that true for the $120 Stinger? Both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the laced variation. You can see that they weigh in at 8.7 ounces, the equivalent of 246 grams. Change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on the laceless model, and you can see that they weigh in at 8.65 ounces, the equivalent of 245 grams, which I would say on average is about 20 to 30 grams more than what you're going to find from the vast majority of the popular top-end models currently on the market from Nike, Adidas, and Puma. But at the same time, I definitely don't think they're heavy, and obviously in comparison to each other, you gain an extra gram with the lacing system, which I personally think is well worth it, just for the sake of a better fit and lockdown. Regardless, considering the $120 price tag, I personally do not think the weight is worth complaining about. On feet, the Charly Stingr PFXs feel really good. I know I made the visual comparison to the Adidas Predator Edge from a number of years ago. These feel significantly better than those ever did. The upper, after a little bit of wear time, softens up really nicely and just has good flexibility and generally just a soft feel against your foot despite not being overly padded because of the lining material that they've gone for. All the rubber is placed and kind of stretched across the upper in such a way where it doesn't restrict stretch at all, which I think is a very good thing from a comfort perspective. And I think the overall shaping, along with the depth of the heel, is also fantastic. Again, for $120, these very much feel like high-end football boots. The sole plate underfoot is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, your only real difference between these two is whether or not you go for the laceless version or the laced variation, where, like I said earlier in the video, if you just want a tighter, more stable, more responsive, more secure fit because of the adjustability that it has on offer, the laced variation is the way to go. I think it's by far the best version of the Stinger. However, if you just want a pair of laceless football boots because you're really into the whole laceless thing, or you just want to try them but don't want to spend $260 plus like you normally would with a top-end elite model from Adidas, I think this is still a pretty good example of a laceless football boot, especially if you need some extra width. Because speaking of width, these have, I would say, a wider than average fit than what you're going to find from basically everything on offer from the big brands right now, at least anything with a synthetic upper. Plenty of width through the midfoot, heel, and even the toe box and forefoot area. I really like the rounded shape that it has, and in general, the boots are just very comfortable out of the box with minimal break-in time required. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing both of these boots in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, obviously getting boots from a brand you've probably never tried before can be a little bit concerning if you're ordering online, but I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit, especially if you have wider feet. I think you'll be really happy with the way that these feel. So in conclusion, it's pretty simple. If you've had your eye on a pair of top-end Predator 25 Elites but don't have $260 plus to spend, the Charly Stingr PFX at less than half the price is effectively going to give you, I don't want to say the exact same experience, but a lot of the same features, again, at a fraction of the price. Where what's cool about being able to make that comparison is that the Stinger doesn't feel like a direct copy of any one boot in particular. Yes, it has design elements that we've seen from popular boots in the past, but so does pretty much everything, given that we've seen just about every design option that's possible in the world of football boots. So it's very difficult these days to come out with something that is entirely unique. But in terms of the feel of the upper, the grip from the rubber striking elements, the quality of the sole plate and stud pattern, and just the way that these boots fit and feel, nothing about them suggests that they are low-end football boots. They very much feel like a high-end product. The only difference is they cost less than half of what you're used to paying. Laced over laceless for me personally, and obviously the experience hasn't been perfect given that I've already lost 2 rubber elements on the right boot. But at $120 to have an experience this good with a pair of football boots really makes you question why some of these popular models out there cost as much as they do. Where I do understand big brands like Nike, Adidas, and Puma spend a ton of money on marketing along with research and development, which is a big factor in what the final retail price they charge ends up being. But I think the big takeaway here for you, the consumer, is just realize that you don't have to spend upwards of $300 to get top-end feel and performance.